Have you noticed how thoughts feel deeper at night? Good evening, friends. If you're here, it means the day is done and the quiet has finally arrived. Tell me, what time is it where you are right now? And what's your favorite way to end the day? If these stories bring you peace, consider subscribing, liking, or sharing them with someone who needs a little calm. Now, let's begin. There is an island where no one wears a watch, where no bells ring and no minutes pass in straight lines. It doesn't appear on most maps, not because it's far, but because it doesn't wish to be found by those still rushing. The sea around it is always calm, always warm, and the boats that arrive do so not on schedule, but when the heart quiets enough to steer. Mine arrived at dusk, gliding through pale blue water as gentle as breath. I didn't ask where I was going, and no one told me. The oars dipped into the sea with soft, careful rhythm, as if they were stirring memory, not water. And when we reached the little wooden dock, no one greeted me with questions or rules, just a soft nod from the boatman who had no need for words. The dock creaked in a way that felt like welcome, and the sand beyond it was cool with the day's fading warmth. I stepped barefoot onto the shore and felt, for the first time in what might have been years, that the world wasn't waiting for me to catch up. The island smelled like salt and soft earth and something blooming. Lanterns hung from short posts along the path, each one glowing with a golden warmth that didn't flicker but hummed like the sound of your name whispered in kindness. The trees here don't crowd, they lean back, open, giving space to the wind and to you. The leaves rustle, not in haste, but in greeting. I followed the path, past a cluster of stone cottages, none identical, each shaped by the hands that built them rounded windows, moss-covered steps, flower boxes spilling with color I didn't know I needed. A cat stretched across a sun-warmed bench and blinked at me slowly, already unbothered by my presence. No one rushed, no one paused. Life moved like the tide, forward but never forcefully. I passed a tall wooden sign, painted in faded blue, that read simply, "You're here now. That's enough." And it was. I could feel something unwinding inside me, like a knot I hadn't noticed had tightened over time, slowly loosening, strand by strand, under the soft weight of stillness. There was a cottage, waiting for me, a small one, with a round door and smoke curling gently from the chimney. Its light glowed through the windows, golden and soft, like the feeling of returning to a place you've never seen but already miss. I opened the door and stepped into warmth. Not heat, but something better. The kind of warmth that settles in the chest and says, "You're allowed to be still now." Inside, everything was wood and wool and stone. A kettle rested on the stove, humming faintly. A chair waited near the window, its cushion already worn in the perfect shape. There was no clock on the wall, no calendar on the table. Just a small note left on the counter. "There's no time here. Only peace. Let it be enough." And so I sat, and I listened, not to noise, but to quiet. Not to my thoughts, but to the space between them. I watched the sky turn lavender beyond the window, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't wonder what came next. Morning arrived without announcement. No alarm, no sharp light. Just a gentle brightening, like the sky remembering how to exhale. I woke not because I had to, but because my body had simply rested enough. The cottage windows, slightly fogged with the breath of night, let in a pale gold light that warmed the wooden floorboards in long, quiet stripes. I lay still for a while, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and sunlight, listening to the subtle creaks of the roof beams adjusting with the morning breeze. Somewhere beyond the walls, a bird called out in a tune too slow to be a song, more like a thoughtful hum. It didn't repeat. It didn't insist. It simply announced the day in its own time and left the air open for response. I sat up, stretched gently, and my feet met the ruga-woven thing, soft and slightly uneven, like it had been made by someone who smiled while working. The kettle on the stove had been left just as I'd seen it the night before, and without rushing, I filled it with cool water from the clay jug beside the sink. The flame beneath the kettle hissed gently when lit, a sound that felt like comfort unfolding. While it warmed, I opened the cottage door and stepped outside into the breeze. The air smelled of dew and ripe fruit, and a trace of wood smoke carried from somewhere beyond the hill. The sea whispered quietly from the distance, not in waves that crashed, but in the kind that lap at sand like fingers brushing linen. I followed the stone path barefoot, past garden beds thick with rosemary and thyme, where bees moved like drowsy thoughts, bumping gently from bloom to bloom. A man passed by with a wide straw hat and a wheelbarrow full of bread. He nodded once, not in greeting but in recognition, as if to say, "Ah, you've remembered how to walk slowly again." I smiled. The trees above me arched slightly, not heavy, just bowed with age and stillness. Every so often, a leaf would fall, drifting with the grace of something unhurried, a small hush of green that kissed the air as it passed. I reached the edge of a field where tall grass swayed like a sea of its own, and beyond it, a wooden swing hung from an old tree. I sat, letting it sway gently beneath me, my toes brushing the ground just enough to feel present. A warm mug appeared in my hands not by magic, but by rhythm. Someone had placed it there while I watched the sky, and I hadn't noticed. It smelled of cinnamon and orange peel, familiar and new at once. I took a slow sip. The warmth moved through me like a small exhale, finding its way home. Across the field I could see more cottages, more gardens, more people moving without purpose. One sat painting on a small easel, another read beneath a patch of shadow. And though I was alone in that moment, I didn't feel it. There was a fullness to the quiet, the kind that wrapped around your ribs and reminded you that presence was not the same as pressure. Time had dissolved completely now, not forgotten, just unnecessary. And with every breath I took, I felt the space inside me widen, not empty, but open. Room to stretch, room to rest, room to be. By midday, not that anyone called it, that I found myself walking along the path that led toward the sea. It wasn't marked, and I wasn't following it. My feet simply found it, the way breath finds stillness once it stops trying. The stones beneath my soles were warm, smoothed by sun and time, and bare footsteps like mine. Along the edges, tall reeds swayed in loose rhythm, brushing against one another like they were trading secrets too soft to speak. The path curved without warning, then straightened again, as if the island wanted to keep me just uncertain enough to stay present. Each turn opened into something gentle. A little grove where wind chimes whispered. A wooden bench where a book had been left open and undisturbed. A fig tree whose branches hung low enough to offer both shade and fruit. I paused beneath it and took one. The skin was soft, the inside honey-sweet. It tasted like something that didn't need to be named. Further down, the air grew saltier, carried on a breeze that spoke of tides and sunlight and safe return. The sea appeared through the trees not as a sudden sight, but like a memory coming back. It was a pale blue mirror, stretching wide beneath a sky so still it looked painted. I stepped off the path and onto the sand, cool and powdery beneath my feet. There were no towels, no umbrellas, no lines drawn in the grain's just driftwood, and footprints in soft hollows where someone might have rested earlier. The water reached for the shore with long, quiet fingers, curling and uncurling in an unbroken rhythm. I stood there for a long moment, feeling it all. The weight of the air, the light on my skin, the gentle silence that never asked for anything but my notice. And I noticed everything. The way my shoulders had fallen into place without me thinking. The way my thoughts had spaced themselves out, giving each other room. The way I was not preparing for anything, not holding tension for what might come next. Just here, just now, a small boat rocked in the shallows, tethered loosely to a post that didn't seem to mind the tide. I waded in, water curling around my calves like silk, and climbed in. The boat didn't drift far, just enough to float, just enough to sway. I leaned back, arms behind my head, and watched the sky. The clouds moved slowly, like they were being pulled on strings made of lullabies. One looked like a sleeping fox, another like a hilltop I once climbed as a child. They changed before I could be sure. The sun, filtered through the lightest veil of mist, felt soft against my face. I closed my eyes and let my body rise and fall with the movement of the sea. Are you still here with me? Still breathing a little deeper? You don't need to do anything right now, not even listen. You can drift too, if that's what your heart needs. Let your thoughts dissolve like footprints on the shore. Let the boat carry them out and back, again and again, without ever needing to hold on to them. There is no arrival here, only staying, only breathing, only the hush of a day that doesn't care for keeping time, only for keeping you. Later, or maybe earlier, depending on nothing in particular, I wandered back from the water's edge, with salt still clinging to my skin and that sweet weight in my limbs that only comes from being truly unhurried. The path through the trees greeted me like an old song, no beginning, no end, just a familiar note held gently in the air. A few petals had fallen since I last passed through, and they lay scattered across the stones like a quiet celebration no one needed to attend. The lanterns hadn't lit yet, but I noticed the way the light had begun to shift, leaning longer across the ground, curling beneath the ferns, and around the steps of cottages that now smelled faintly of warm bread and citrus peel. I paused near one low wall where ivy had grown thick and sleepy, the kind that knows it has all the time in the world to climb. A wooden chair sat tucked in beside it, angled just so, and I sank into it with the ease of someone who has forgotten the shape of urgency. From here, I could hear the soft clatter of dishes being cleaned somewhere nearby, and the distant laughter of someone discovering something small and lovely, maybe a ripe fig, or the way moss glows in certain kinds of shade. My eyes fell half closed, not from tiredness, but from comfort. And I thought, maybe this is what we're all secretly looking for. Not achievement, not arrival, just a place to sit quietly and be gently observed by the world without demand. The chair creaked as I shifted slightly, and the sound felt like permission to stay. So I did. A breeze passed low over the path, warm and steady, and it stirred a wind chime above me that I hadn't noticed before. Its tone was soft and round, like water tipping from a wooden ladle. I listened. I didn't count the rings. I didn't need to. And neither do you. Are you still with me? Still resting in the quiet? If your breath has slowed, if your jaw has softened, that's all I hoped for. That's all this island hopes for. I closed my eyes fully for a time then, feeling the warmth of the chair beneath me, the whisper of leaves overhead, and the knowledge that nothing was waiting for me elsewhere. I had nowhere to return to because here had become enough. When I opened my eyes again, a mug had been placed gently on the arm of the chair. I hadn't seen who brought it, but I knew better than to be surprised. It was always like this on the island. Needs noticed before they were named. I took it in both hands, cradled the warmth, and brought it to my lips. The tea was something floral and familiar, something that tasted like belonging. A bird flew low across the path in front of me, dipping once before rising back into the hush of the trees, and I smiled not at the bird, but at the quiet it left behind. A quiet I could carry, a quiet I could keep. The light had changed again, not suddenly, but in the kind of slow unfolding that only happens when no one is watching the clock. I stood from the chair with the tea still warming my hands, and began to follow the edge of the garden that curled lazily behind the cottages. Vines hung low along the stone walls, heavy with blooms that hadn't decided whether to open fully or fall asleep in the dusk. The path bent toward the cliffs not high or sharp, but rolling and moss-covered, like a pillow where the island laid its thoughts at night. I took the long way, letting my feet brush against soft grasses and the occasional scatter of petals still warm from the sun. The trees rustled with something between a sigh and a lullaby, their branches stretching wide to cradle the sky as it faded from golden to lavender. Just beyond them, the sea waited again, not asking me to come to it this time, but simply reminding me it was there, like a familiar hum in the background of a very quiet room. Lanterns had begun to glow all along the path, amber and round, suspended by string or cradled in wooden bowls, placed gently on tree stumps and railings. They didn't flicker. Their light was steady, like a breath held in kindness. As I passed each one, I felt it not just on my skin, but in my chest, as though they were lighting something inside me too, a slow, gentle warmth, the kind that doesn't demand attention but stays with you, even when you stop noticing. I found a small bench tucked into a curve in the trail, the wood smoothed by time, with cushions that looked like they'd never been out of place. I sat again. No reason. Just because the evening had grown quiet enough to make sitting feel like a form of gratitude. Across the clearing, a woman strummed a guitar with her eyes closed. No words, just sound, carried lightly on the breeze and scattered like breadcrumbs across the dusk. I watched a group of children chasing something small and laughing without edges, their voices rising and fading like birdsong. And I thought, this is what happens when time steps aside. Life becomes music again. I closed my eyes, letting the cool settle gently across my arms, the kind that doesn't bite but reminds you to notice your skin. And if your eyes are closed too, if you've sunk just a little deeper where you are, that's enough. You've made it this far and you don't have to move quickly anymore. Not here, not now. Maybe just notice the weight of your breath. Maybe let your shoulders drop a little more. You've done enough for today. You don't have to do more. The wind carried the smell of something baking, cinnamon and apple, I think. And I imagined the warmth of that kitchen, the steady rhythm of hands kneading, folding, brushing flour from the counter without hurry. I smiled. I didn't need to taste it. Just knowing it was being made was enough. Somewhere nearby, a door creaked open, a kettle poured, a page turned. Every sound had its own gentle rhythm, like the island had written its own lullaby and was playing it in pieces, one peaceful moment at a time. The sky darkened into blue velvet. The lanterns glowed a little stronger, and the hush grew deeper, not quieter, but closer, like a hand resting lightly on your shoulder, like a voice whispering without words. Stay here. Rest longer. Let the night do the holding for a while. By the time I rose from the bench, the sky had deepened into a dark so soft it felt woven, not empty. Stars appeared slowly, not in clusters, but in quiet suggestions. One here, one there, as though the island was lighting them by hand. I walked slowly now, not from fatigue, but because the world had slowed enough to match my step. The path widened, curving toward a small circle of cottages gathered like old friends beneath a grove of olive trees. In the center, a fire crackled gently, not large or dancing, but settled low and amber, casting halos of warmth across the worn stones. Around it, a few chairs had been left out, draped with blankets in quiet colors, and I chose one without choosing, letting my body move the way it would if it had nothing to prove. I sank into the cushion, pulled the blanket up over my legs, and leaned back with a breath I hadn't realized I'd been saving. The stars overhead didn't twinkle. They shimmered, they held, and in the branches above, the wind moved like a soft hush, brushing against the leaves with the gentleness of a lullaby only nature could sing. Across the fire, an old man sat polishing a stone pipe, not smoking it, just caring for it. A woman hummed low as she knit something that already looked worn in, and a young boy curled into a chair, much too big for him, watching the flames with the kind of focus only stillness can teach. No one spoke. No one needed to. The fire said enough. The night even more. I watched the flames curl upward, their tips barely lifting, and I imagined each flicker was a thought, leaving quietly. No resistance, no need to return. And if you're with me, still eyes half-lidded, hands resting loose in your lap or beneath a blanket, I hope something inside you feels that same release. You don't need to hold it all right now. You don't even need to name it. Just let the warmth of this moment remind you, you are already enough. The people around the fire slowly stood, not all at once, but naturally, one by one. They wandered back to their cottages, leaving behind only the sound of wool dragging softly over stone. The the hush of closing doors. I stayed. I let the fire shrink to a glowing bed of embers, its light low and steady. I could hear the sea again, not distant now, but just beyond the trees, its rhythm even, measured, almost like breathing. I imagined the waves pressing gently against the island's edge, not asking to come in, just reminding it they were still there, still keeping time in the slowest, kindest way. The stars above had multiplied quiet, constant, unblinking. And I thought, maybe we don't need time at all when the body learns to listen, when the breath slows and the mind stops knocking on every door. You've done that tonight, haven't you? You've slowed, you've softened, and that's more than enough. I pulled the blanket higher, leaned further into the chair, and let the island hold me. Night held firm now, not heavy, but whole, as though the island had closed its eyes and invited you to do the same. I left the fire behind, its embers glowing softly in the clearing like the pulse of something deeply alive. The air had cooled in a way that made me walk slower, arms wrapped loosely around myself, not for warmth, but to notice the shape of my own presence. Along the path, the lanterns glowed brighter than before, not because the fire had dimmed, but because the world had grown quieter around them. Each step felt suspended in time, like walking between the lines of a poem, whispered just once and then forgotten. I passed the low garden again, where even the leaves looked sleepy, folding slightly under the weight of their own contentment. A moth brushed past my shoulder, soft as breath, and carried on into the trees. At the far end of the path, I reached the little cottage that had welcomed me the day before, though it felt now as if I'd been here forever, or perhaps just long enough. The door opened with the same gentle sigh, and the inside glowed with the light of a single candle waiting patiently on the table. I set down my mug empty now, but still warm to the touching. Sat in the same chair near the window where the blanket still waited, folded neatly across the back. I draped it over my shoulders and listened. Nothing moved quickly. Not the breeze, not the flame, not even my own thoughts. The silence was full, not hollow a silence that wrapped around me like a second blanket. I leaned into it, watching the sky through the window, where stars had gathered in tighter constellations, as if they too had drawn nearer to rest. And if you're listening now, if your eyes are heavier, your shoulders looser, your breath softer, know that you're safe here. There's no more to do, no more to answer. Let your hands unclench. Let your mind slow even further. You've arrived, again and again, just by staying here. I traced a finger slowly along the windowsill, where someone long ago had carved a small spiral into the wood. It wasn't decoration, it was intention. A quiet reminder that all things move in gentle return, that nothing has to be hurried to be whole. The candle flickered once, then steadied, as if agreeing with the thought. The room smelled faintly of pine and sleep, something old and steady, something that made me want to close my eyes, not to escape, but to stay. And perhaps you feel that too, the pull to stop reaching, to let the rest of you arrive where your breath already has. Outside, I could hear the faintest sound of waves folding into sand and pulling back again, never eager, never unsure. The tide was doing what the tide always does, holding space for everything that visits and everything that returns. I let my head rest against the back of the chair, felt my heart beat in the soft center of my chest, and thought not in words, but in feeling, you're doing just fine. All of you, every quiet part. The sky didn't shift again. It simply stayed. The stars above and the flame beside me mirrored each other, and the room, the island, my own breath, all of it held steady. I closed my eyes not to end the night, but to sink further into it, not to leave the island, but to become part of its quiet rhythm. The candle burned lower, its glow settling into the room like a familiar hush. Nothing had changed. Not really, but it felt as if everything had finally exhaled. I remained in the chair by the window, eyes closed for a while, though time wasn't keeping track. When I opened them again, the stars outside had drawn in a little closer, crowding gently into the sky, as though they'd moved to the edge of the island just to watch over it. A faint breeze touched the edge of the window pane, stirring the curtain only enough to remind me it was still there. The warmth from the fire earlier had lingered in the wood, in the walls, and now it lingered in me too. I stood slowly, not because I needed to move, but because the moment had shifted softly, like a change in the tide, and it felt right to follow. I walked through the small cottage, trailing a hand across the books on the shelf, the clay cup left to dry on the counter, the wool throw folded gently at the foot of the bed. Everything in its place. Nothing polished, but everything cared for. It reminded me of the way we care for people when no one is watching. Not with grandeur, but with presence, with noticing, with quiet. I stepped outside barefoot once more. The stones were cool now beneath me, their warmth tucked away, waiting for another day. I followed a short path down toward the grove behind the cottage's lantern, still glowing softly like memory, the air thick with pine and lavender and the faint scent of something baking for morning. There, beneath the tallest tree, was a hammock I hadn't noticed before. It swayed gently, as if it had always been waiting for me to lie down and listen to nothing. I eased into it, letting the fabric cradle me, the sky opening above like a deep, endless hush. No sound but the sea, no task but breath. And if you're still here, still listening, then maybe part of you is resting too. Maybe your breath has slowed. Maybe the muscles behind your eyes have softened. Maybe you've given yourself just a little more permission to be still. That's all the island ever asked. That's all it ever gave. The stars held, the air cooled gently, and my thoughts thinned out until they were no longer thoughts at all, just sensation, just memory, just peace. I felt the weight of my body fully grounded and light at once, and knew there was nothing more to seek. Not tonight. Not here. I closed my eyes again. Not because I needed to, but because sleep had already begun its soft work. It moved through me like the tide, patient and certain. I didn't need to count the stars. I didn't need to measure the night. It would hold without me. And maybe, just maybe, it will hold you too. For as long as you need, for as long as you wish. There is no shore here, no leaving. Only this breath, this quiet, this island, still here, still holding. Thank you for drifting with me tonight. If this story brought you even a little more ease, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you'd like more moments like this, you're always welcome to subscribe and join me again. Until next time, Rest well. You've done enough for today.